Hello, welcome to the end of June. It is our last Q&A podcast for now. Last week I interrupted our Q&A month because I had an episode that I really wanted to share from Allie Goff as we prepare and tamp down promotion of our wealth and wellness retreat going on in September. And so I hope that you enjoyed that one. I wanted to get that one stuck in. So today I'm going to do several questions from Wendy, Jeanine, and Sarah. And I do better when I have a really solid outline. I don't babble as much. So my podcast editor is going to wonder today. So I'm going to try to just free ball it today. And happy summer. Summer is summerine over here. Until yesterday, I had baby chickens in my living room in a box, a very lovely box home that my son made. And today, between meetings, my kids brought a gopher in a bucket. And I said, could you please take that back outside before it gets loose in my house? Thank God I have a cat. That is all I have to say. They got it outside. All is well. But that is how summer feels here. It is why I have an office, a different office away from home. I thought this was going to be my last summer with that office. I was feeling it. And after the events of the last couple of days, maybe not. So let me jump right into it. I've got a few questions. I'm just going to free talk about them. I always do. But if I don't have an outline, sometimes I go off on tangents. Welcome to having a real conversation with me, actually. And one of my toxic traits is to try to shove too much into one thing. What do we call that? 100 pounds of crap into a 50-pound bag. I'm really good at that. In different words, I always try to make one appointment into three, right? I always try to jam three appointments of value. So it's a little bit of a challenge. And I will say also, this was my last week. There was a lot going on as I finished up June. It was my last week of one-on-one case audits for a while. Those are being replaced with a virtual, like, second opinion thing, but it gives me a little more freedom this summer. And I don't know when I'm going to bring those back. I enjoy them, but it's a different energy than when you're already in a committed relationship, right? We're maybe dating. Are we going to work together? Are we not going to work together? And I enjoy the committed relationships with clients, and also I have embraced that slower pace of life for the summer. So that was something I set into place last September. Anyway, I could talk all day about intention, ideal days. You're going to hear that in an upcoming episode I have with Mel Abraham. There's a great episode coming up with Jill Carnahan. Please get excited. Absolutely love it. Next week, we are off for the Independence Day holiday in the United States as I make it to two back-to-back family reunions. Okay, jumping into questions from Sarah. She said, now remember, these questions came from March and April, and Sarah is responding to my part one healing story. And she says, I loved this episode so much. I would love to hear your whole story. Biggest needle movers, nervous system work you find works best. Sarah said, I was the healthiest person I knew before 2020. Since my first stint with COVID, I developed chronically swollen fingers, food allergies, eczema. And she said, what you said about hand eczema, let me know you knew all the things. Thank you. MCAS, alpha trypsaemia, and now I'm postmenopausal at 48. No surprise I have a high ACE score. That just means adverse childhood events. It's a kind of a technical term for childhood trauma, usually, or one of the ways they score it for research. Any insights you can lend would be so appreciative. I meditate multiple times a day, changed my relationship to exercise, and been doing EMDR for over a year. Thank you so much, Sarah. Again, if I can I will maybe talk about this a little bit later, because I did make some notes and I ended up on a tangent about my thoughts about emotions stored in the body and how I see it showing up on people's faces and skin and life and thyroid and all the things. Also because it was me. So I will just say I have a lot of empathy for Sarah. I'll mention one thing about myself and then I'm going to talk about Sarah. So since she said, I'd love to hear your whole story. So the first part of my story was really that I would say there was a survival component for sure. And I did a lot of gut and drainage work. I was resolving eczema and improving some brain fog and fatigue. But the second health crisis, which maybe I'll do a podcast on, I really crashed my stress hormones from over restriction of diet. And so that part, not that our stories are the same on how we got there, but the result in our bodies are more related. So that story will be probably more in relation to you. I'll talk about your case in a second. And then the last part that I may or may not touch on today that I've been going through recently is just inner healing work. And that has been really incredible. And I'll speak for a moment about Sarah's comment about even nervous system work that I find works best. And I've been experimenting with nervous system work for over 5 years. And the stuff I bring into practice is coaching, bringing the unconscious to conscious. That was such a dramatic thing for me. That won't resonate with anyone who really needs it. What that looks like is when you're plowing through life and you don't have time to stop and deal with the stuff because you just got to keep going. And so for all these women and people that have done that, we start to develop almost this hardness around us, right? Where it's hard to feel the feelings. So if you're a person who like doesn't like to cry, I'm talking to you, talking to you. And so some of the stuff, so I have coaching, which I feel like it takes us from our brain into being able to feel things, which is a whole conversation in itself. And then I love breath work. And then I'm really interested in inner healing work right now. There's so many things, but sometimes for clients that just are going, we recommend nervous system devices. There's always an option. So that's a whole separate episode. I would love to be prompted to talk about it. So I want to talk a little bit about you in case it's helpful, Sarah, just sharing that I see you here. And if we sliced and diced your story, if I was talking to you one-on-one, we would have so much fun talking for 2 hours. But as we all know, COVID was really hard on the areas in the body that needed support. And was very often the real straw breaking the camel's back. So I don't know everything about your history. So I hope that there was some things brewing in retrospect that would make that make sense. But COVID, of course, was a lot of inflammation. And so something that bothered me was when something terrible or people would get very sick and they were athletes, they would say, I don't know why these athletes are getting sick. They're very healthy. And that is true. They're doing healthy practices like exercising. But when we are exercising, it is inducing intentional inflammation. And so I've probably talked about this quite a bit here and there in the podcast before, but when I was doing comprehensive micronutrient testing, athletes would have some of the worst micronutrient tests. They were really depleted. And what that is related to COVID and your story, because the conversation is that I think one major thing that happened if we try to simplify this situation, which I know it's very complex, but if we try to oversimplify it, there's a lot of cellular damage that happened because of inflammation from COVID and a lot of activation of cell danger response, right? So the immune system is reacting negatively, the nervous system is reacting negatively, and you're doing some nervous system work. And one of the sort of side effects to having a lot of communication of unsafety, like it's not okay, is your system starts to react like, oh my gosh, it starts to freak out. And some of the systems involved with that are especially the stress hormones and adrenals, and just loving and nourishing those and giving those basic minerals is such a good step in the right direction if you're not doing that. In fact, having an imbalance of certain minerals, sodium potassium imbalance, can cause a lot of swelling in the hands. Actually, I've seen it could be water retention as well. But since you said swollen fingers, I've definitely seen an imbalance of sodium potassium around that. Just in general with food reactions, if they're true allergies or if they're really just having reactions in general or eczema, I just need to tell you a little bit of a story because this really all could be related. When you have that big stressor like COVID, it can start to unravel some things, or it's going to use up more nutrients. The less nutrients you have, I think of those like workers. And then if you don't have those nutrients, they can't do their job at the factories in your body, at all these organ systems in the body. And then those factories don't really work at optimum output. And then you're going to get symptoms. But I want to share another example. I think that's like such a good metaphor personally to me. And that's how I think about if you walked in, I would say, here's some priorities you need. You need some nourishment to communicate safety to your body, because right now your body's, I can't even I can barely do the basics. And so I would say minerals, definitely things in the right order, probably more potassium than sodium, different things like that. I would be hanging out in Epsom salt baths. Also, since your mast cells are freaking out, maybe some Holy Basil, really well tolerated, a really clean source of Holy Basil. There is an old episode with Leslie from Unique Healing. She changed her whole business model, but she had Holy Basil that was like in a very safe, backbone. I haven't really come across where I've been working with people who needed that level. But anyway, I want to talk about some of these symptoms that you have and something I've seen in practice that I think is a bit interesting. And I hope it helps lots of people. Something I've seen is that people, so somewhat related to the metaphor I gave earlier about how different stressors come in and they use up nutrients, which are workers, and then the systems don't work a huge premise I operate out of all the time because my main thing is supporting your machines to work properly and then symptoms go away at the end. So something I see with especially toxic burden exposure, which we all have, we're all exposed to crap all the time because we're just humans living in this world that's imperfect. It is what it is. And so our body is going to try to protect us when we are exposed to trash. It is going to clear it out as much as possible. That's why we have a liver, right? That's why we have kidneys. There's other types of drainage as well. But our body's going to try to clear it out in those machines as much as possible. And sometimes it's not going to be able to clear it out for different reasons. And so it may store it in places. It may shove it away because your body is really trying to protect you. And if it just stays in circulation, that's not supportive. You got some, I'm trying to think of a metaphor on the fly. I think I should avoid it, but imagine this really inflammatory, nasty substance just circulating through your body. Your body's going to try to store that away in some tissue, which may result in increased weight gain for some people. Maybe, maybe not. Definitely it's not a blanket statement. I'm just saying there's different ways people's bodies respond. Some people that doesn't happen, but it is getting shoved away in tissue. And something I see is that people may go through a chronic period of stress, like maybe more than a month. So let's pretend you were sick for more than a month, which is probable given what you're telling me so far. Or maybe there was even a few stressors before that. So if chronic is usually 1+ month. So you're sick for a while, or you're stressed, you have an ongoing stressor for a while. That it's like, it uses up so many more resources, so many more workers that you just didn't have in the first place. And then everything falls apart. That's the easiest way to say it. It's like your body was managing the best it could with what it had, the limited staff it had. And then you bring in chronic stress and it really uses up staff. The staff is getting burned out like crazy. And now you can't manage what you were barely holding on before. So what I see actually manifest and show up is people were doing okay. Symptoms were not crazy. And then they have this period of at least a month of stress. And then things like literally fall apart. So let me give you an example. Sometimes people were previously exposed to mold at some point, some job, some house, whatever, maybe their own home. And it's not too bad. They have some annoying little things, like maybe they're like got a little stuffy nose here and there. Maybe they were getting sick for a while, whatever. But after this chronic period of stress, like they go into this hyper reaction of foods. They get a rash, et cetera. And I see a fair bit of that as well. So Sarah, I hope that is supportive. I would say that the last piece here that I heard from you, where all of this makes sense, is when we shift, we have like really two phases of life as women, right? Menstruating, reproductive age, and then post-menstruation when we're not we're not priming for reproduction. And so when we're reproducing, we're relying a lot on our ovaries. And when we are not reproducing, our ovaries are like, all right, cool. I'm going to downshift the production of those hormones. And in short, some of the burden for hormone production gets shifted to the adrenals. And so one concept is that if the adrenals were already in a slightly sad state, which I personally think symptoms and history is a clearer picture of this. I could talk about testing for it, but you can't just go to the doctor and get a blood test for cortisol. That's not really accurate. So it's because it has a spike and it has a pattern for the day. Lots of ways to consider it. But anyway, I think history and symptoms are totally fine sometimes. Doesn't hurt to support an organ system. So we got a lot of pressure on these guys. And so anyway, it is possible, and this is definitely something I'm navigating always as well as part of my part 2 health story, is that if the adrenals are already a bit sad, they're already stressed, they're already whatever, like sometimes that transition is not always as graceful. Like sometimes there's more bumps in the road and more challenges. So Sarah, thank you so much for sharing your story with me as well. And man, I hope that we get to connect at some point. All right, thank you. And so I was just talking about menstruation and reproduction and non-reproduction timelines. And so that takes me beautifully into Jeanine's question, which is, and I'll do my best with it. I think it's a really nice question. It's like a full appointment of a question, right? Where it's like, how do you adapt supplements and lifestyle for addressing eczema, food sensitivities, detox, and supporting drainage while trying to get pregnant and during pregnancy? Any recommendations, suggestions, tips on targets, what to avoid, take, etc. Okay, so to back up, the easy way to answer this question is that because there's really several pieces to it. And so I'm going to separate it into trying to get pregnant and then during pregnancy. I think that is the easiest thing to say to do as I'm doing this on the fly, as if I'm talking to Jeanine. And so when you're trying to get pregnant, it depends on what your timeline is and what you're willing to do. Obviously, context is king always. But when I'm having conversations with clients about pregnancy preparedness, what we do 3 months in advance really affects egg quality. And so egg quality is very much related to mitochondrial support. So anything we do to support mitochondria supports egg quality. And the better egg quality, sometimes the better things are. There's other things that are going to prime our body for reproduction as well. All things that affect hormones, which is going to be stress, blood sugar, nutrients, drainage, and gut health. So I try to improve all of that stuff before trying to get pregnant. Whatever. Sometimes that doesn't happen. During pregnancy, it's contraindicated to do certain herbs, aggressive drainage things. If you're walking and sweating, great. But and here's the thing, like people could have disagreements all day long. So there is going to be a comfort thing. And of course, this is a public audience. So in general, we don't take risks during pregnancy. That said, knowing maybe who I'm even talking to, depending on my age in pregnancy and where pregnancy rates are right now, I would be aggressive about asking my provider early to check progesterone, in my opinion, because it is going to be a very common reason that pregnancies do not happen or are not viable. And that's a whole conversation of like, how does someone want to correct it, depending on the amount of time they have, et cetera. We are in a progesterone deficient epidemic. We have been for years. And that would be something I would be really interested in. Like I would be really focusing on what would I want to support to ensure the best outcomes, best viability, just preparing my body in that way. So we don't want to do aggressive treatments. So a mantra I have is always be more supportive than aggressive. And that is the approach in pregnancy. So if we have a client and she gets pregnant in the middle of some of our more aggressive protocols, no worries. We just stop those things because we don't take risks. It's not like a big stressor. It's going to be fine, but we don't take risks. So we just stop the aggressive things and we only do the supportive things. So anything that falls under support at all. So any kind of nutrients, any kind of supportive things to gut bacteria, which is like probiotics, right? All supportive angles. And there's several buckets of things I would put that into. So I hope that helps a bit. And then I think we've got lots of episodes on pregnancy nutrients. There's conversations about choline. We've got conversations about DHA levels. And if your DHA is low, how it's related to preterm birth, which I think I wish we could put omega testing into all prenatal care. We all have a lot of wishes. Probably worthwhile to do a short masterclass on pregnancy preparedness. I do feel like I've got a lot to say on this, and I would just love to be anything like that where I could just be really helpful, right? Because there's so many people that want to have a really great pregnancy. And so what can we do to try to help there? I probably should do something like that. Okay. From Wendy, I'll do my best on this one because there's kind of a lot tucked in here too. Wendy says, lately I've noticed little bumps appearing on the edges of my eyelids. They come and go. They cause a little stinging when I blink. They hang around, then they're gone. Also very near my eyes and the lower eyelid, I have noticed a couple bumps appearing. They're also white, but not like acne. They're tiny, just annoying. I don't recall getting these before. I'm wondering if they're related. These don't go away very quickly. They like to hang around. So sometimes with skin stuff. So first of all, I'm not a diagnostic clinician, so I really don't exactly know. I can only make guesses about what Wendy's experiencing, what it looks like. And so I'm going to speak to what I do know, which is something I'm really interested in, which is how sometimes the location of where skin issues pop up can give us some clues about what could be supported. However, this can apply all over the body. There's lots of places that don't have a ton of significance to me, but there are several that have a lot of significance. Like I've personally noticed seem to be associated with certain root causes, which is cool. Probably would be really fun to make a little bit of a cheat sheet on that. Put that down on our list of 10,000 things to do. So in something I care a lot about, you may have heard me talk about, is that in Eastern Asia, I think it's probably appropriate to call it Eastern Asian medicine. I know I have a super fun episode with an acupuncturist where we talk about what's most correct, but sometimes we would just say traditional Chinese medicine, but it might be much larger than that. And I've got an episode I know about face mapping as well, which is just a topic I'm obsessed with because I had eczema all over my neck and around my eye. And everyone that I see with eczema, which Wendy is not describing, around their eye, there is certainly a drainage and liver component for sure. Because in this Eastern Asian traditions, skin issues around the eye are related to liver, typically around the chin, usually like gynecological. So if there's acne on the chin, I can pretty much assume you're not clearing your estrogen very well, which is still going to be like gut and liver stuff and some other options as well. But I would wonder, and just with the presentation of this, it's like all skin issues, I have to operate under the basics of physiology, right? Which is all skin issues are in somewhat a drainage issue. So I have thoughts about that. Wendy had also asked a little bit of a question. It was like a big question about like rheumatoid arthritis and all the ways to treat it and all the things. And all I can really say is that there's a couple primary. This isn't really my jam. I've definitely worked with RA, but I can speak to some extreme basics really quickly. There's two major categories of arthritis: osteoarthritis, which is considered, again, I'm not an expert, degenerative or age-related, typically of an actual structural site. What are we going to do with it? And by the way, I think that I personally think, again, not an expert, but I've just seen the beauty, the results of this. There are injections like ozone type injection. There's specialists that do this stuff, and prolozone therapies, which are a little bit different, that can really give a lot more. They can really relieve pain and support that joint. So that's all I'll say about that. Actually, that would be a really great episode. I think that is an underrated conversation. There's also rheumatoid arthritis, which is an autoimmune type of arthritis. And usually when I used to assess more RA cases, now I don't really say I do all these autoimmune. I do a lot of gut, skin, and food sensitivities. I would love to do fatigue all day too. But anyway, so back to RA, I usually ask people, does that pain migrate around? And if it does, there's definitely nutritional implications that could be looked at. However, knowing the person who submitted this question, when all members of the family have different symptoms and they all kind of dance around, this one looks like drainage and this one looks like gut and drainage. And by the way, joint pain pops up when this is exposed, etc. Sometimes when the whole family's got symptoms, I think it's really good to put a quick checklist of the symptoms or a list in general and the onset of those, because you might want to look. Sometimes there's toxic burden stuff. And actually, we have a member of our team that was dealing with some different things, and we have been sleuthing around it for about a year and really curious about radon poison. And I'm not actually talking about Wendy's question, but just talking about all the toxic burden things. Absolutely not to be fear-mongering whatsoever, but I'm a very curious person. And so it's, wow, all the things we don't know. We don't know to know. And so we have run hair tissue mineral analysis for over 5 years in practice. And on that, it shows uranium, and high uranium levels could be related to large levels of radon as well. So I can think of many cases where I did like multiple members of the family and uranium was high. Anyway, so just some thoughts. Definitely still supporting. I think the takeaway here is definitely still supporting those systems to come into balance. Yes, there could be a lot more lenses we could apply this to, but trying to be simple as well, because sometimes my goal is to be in best service. And so I have to be careful. I don't want to give you a half-baked recommendation, right? So supporting those major systems usually will bring that back into balance. The thing with autoimmune conditions is I do find that food triggers become more significant. There are some real shifts and changes that happen. So sometimes those with RA are actually quite sensitive to nightshades, for example. So like white potatoes, peppers. I'm forgetting all of the nightshades, but there's tomatoes. There's a short list of favorite garden foods on that list. And I'm not making a suggestion someone should remove or whatever. There's just always opportunities. It depends on the severity of what someone's dealing with, et cetera, et cetera. I will not go off on my tangent about other weird things on the internet, but I just want to say thank you for listening to this podcast. I love my podcast listeners. Last year, maybe a little bit longer, we also started publishing the podcast on YouTube, which is great, but sometimes the comments are weird, very weird. So that is all I will say about that. I have lots of feelings about that, but you know what? We covered a fair bit today. I feel really good about it. I'm super thankful for Wendy, Jeanine, and Sarah's comments and questions that they submitted. Let's do this again soon. As I finished up case audits this week, I almost did a little bit of an asset, like a share of some of the things and themes I saw in practice this week. So that might be fun. I have got the longest list of really specific episodes, including one I have wanted to do for 2 years about shoes and back pain and barefoot shoes, because I have spent all the money on all the shoes and I got some really good information for you that will save you lots of money. So I'm super jacked about that. Have an amazing week next week, and I will see you back here in July together. Thank you so much for being here and have a great day.